I arrived at my late husband, Mason Brooks' secluded farmhouse expecting nothing more than silence and old memories. He had passed away only a few weeks earlier, and I finally felt ready to visit the property he had always insisted on managing by himself. Throughout our marriage, Mason rarely spoke about the farmhouse. Whenever I asked, he would simply smile and say it was his quiet place to clear his mind. I never questioned him because I trusted him completely. That trust shattered the moment I unlocked the front door. Instead of finding an empty, dusty house, I stepped into a home that was clearly occupied. Fresh flowers decorated the dining table, shoes were lined up neatly by the entrance, children's toys covered the living room floor, and family photographs of strangers filled the walls. My heart started racing. The only explanation I could think of was that my husband had been living a double life. Every terrible possibility rushed through my head. Had he secretly started another family? While I believed we had the perfect marriage, before I could process what I was seeing, footsteps echoed from the second floor. A woman slowly walked downstairs, holding the hand of a young girl. She froze the moment she noticed me. Seconds later, two more women appeared with several children standing quietly behind them. None of them looked dangerous. Instead, they looked terrified, as though they expected bad news every time someone came to the door. I demanded to know who they were and why they were inside my house. No one answered, and their silence only made me angrier. I reached for my phone and announced that I was calling the police. Before I could dial, an elderly man hurried through the front door. His name was Harold Bennett, the caretaker Mason had hired years earlier. Harold begged me to wait before making any decisions. He explained that the women living inside the farmhouse were not trespassers. They were survivors who had escaped abusive relationships. The farmhouse had never been a vacation home. It had always been a secret shelter where women and children could hide until they were safe. At first, I couldn't make myself believe what Harold was telling me. Every instinct insisted there had to be some terrible misunderstanding. The farmhouse, the unfamiliar women, the children's toys scattered through the living room, and the whispered conversations all pointed toward a secret life I never imagined my husband could have lived. None of it fit the man I had shared my life with. Mason had always been honest, dependable, and compassionate. If something this important had existed, why had he never trusted me enough to tell me? My thoughts raced as I searched Harold's face, hoping he would suddenly admit this had all been a mistake. Instead, he quietly asked me to follow him. He led me down a narrow hallway to a small office tucked away at the back of the farmhouse. The room was simple, but carefully organized. A sturdy wooden desk sat beneath the window. Shelves were lined with neatly labeled binders, and framed photographs hung on the walls. Everything reflected Mason's personality, orderly, practical, and quietly thoughtful. Harold walked to one of the shelves and carefully lifted down a polished wooden box. Across the lid, written in Mason's unmistakable handwriting, was my name. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Seeing my name written by my late husband made my chest tighten. My hands shook as I slowly lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of neatly organized envelopes, faded photographs, legal files, financial statements, handwritten journals, and official documents dating back nearly 15 years. It wasn't a random collection of papers. It was the story of a part of Mason's life that he had carried alone. I reached for the first envelope. The familiar handwriting instantly brought tears to my eyes. It felt as though Mason were sitting beside me, speaking directly to me one last time. As I unfolded the letter, every question I had carried into that farmhouse slowly began to unravel. He started by apologizing, not because he had stopped loving me or because he had lived a double life, but because he knew discovering this after his death would hurt me. He admitted that keeping such an enormous secret from the person he loved most had been the hardest decision he had ever made. He understood I would probably feel betrayed before I understood the truth, and he begged me to keep reading before judging him. Then came the story I had never heard. Years before we met, Mason had a younger sister named Emily. According to his letter, she had spent years trapped in a violent marriage. She tried repeatedly to escape, but every attempt failed because she had nowhere safe to go. Family members lived too far away, friends were afraid to get involved, and shelters in the area were overcrowded or unavailable. Every time she tried to rebuild her life, she was forced back into the same dangerous situation. Eventually, the abuse claimed her life. Mason wrote that losing his sister shattered him in ways he never fully recovered from. The guilt haunted him every day because he believed that if someone had simply offered her a safe place to hide, she might still be alive. He carried that burden for years, promising himself that no other family should experience the same heartbreak if he could do something to prevent it. That promise became his life's mission. Without telling anyone, he purchased the old farmhouse. What looked like an ordinary country property to the outside world slowly became something much greater. He quietly partnered with domestic violence counselors, nonprofit organizations, volunteer attorneys, therapists, medical professionals, and trusted members of local law enforcement. Together, they transformed the farmhouse into a confidential emergency shelter where women and children escaping dangerous situations could begin again. Every security measure was carefully planned. Only a handful of trusted people knew the exact location. Records were kept private. Volunteers were carefully carefully screened. Even suppliers delivering food or furniture believed they were serving an ordinary community center. Mason explained that secrecy wasn't optional. It was the very thing that kept frightened families alive. One sentence in particular stopped me cold. He wrote that telling me the truth had tempted him countless times, especially on nights when he came home emotionally exhausted after helping another family find safety. Yet every time he considered it, he imagined the possibility that even an accidental conversation, an innocent question, or a careless comment could expose the location. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone remained. His silence had never been about hiding something from me. It had been about protecting people who had already suffered enough. As I continued reading, the anger I had carried into that room slowly dissolved. Every page revealed another act of kindness I had never witnessed. Financial records showed that Mason quietly paid utility bills, grocery expenses, school tuition, counseling sessions, legal fees, medical appointments, and emergency transportation for families who had absolutely nothing. He never asked for repayment. He never attached his name to charitable donations. He never sought awards, recognition, or public praise. He simply helped. The photographs inside the box revealed smiling children playing in the backyard, birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, graduation ceremonies, and families standing proudly beside the keys to their first apartments after leaving the shelter. Mason appeared in only a few of the pictures, usually standing in the background with his hands in his pockets and the same gentle smile I knew so well. He had never wanted to be the hero of anyone's story. He only wanted them to survive long enough to write a better one. Harold quietly introduced me to the families currently living at the farmhouse. One by one, they shared pieces of their journeys. A young mother explained how she fled in the middle of the night, carrying only her sleeping toddler. Another woman described years of emotional and physical abuse before finally finding the courage to leave. One teenage boy admitted it was the first time he had slept through the night without fear in years. As I listened, the farmhouse transformed before my eyes. The toys scattered across the living room no longer seemed mysterious. They belonged to children who finally felt secure enough to laugh. The drawings taped to the refrigerator represented little hands discovering happiness again. Every bedroom, every hallway, every repaired window carried a story of someone rebuilding a life that violence had nearly stolen. Again and again, I heard Mason's name. The children remembered him as the man who fixed broken bicycles and read bedtime stories. The mothers remembered him as the quiet volunteer who always arrived carrying groceries, winter coats, or backpacks filled with school supplies. The staff remembered him as the first person to show up whenever something broke and the last person to leave after making sure everyone was safe. To them, Mason wasn't simply a generous donor, he was hope. By the time the afternoon ended, I realized I had spent years believing I knew every part of the man I married. The truth was even more extraordinary than I could have imagined. He had carried unimaginable responsibility while expecting nothing in return. He protected complete strangers with the same devotion he showed our own family, never asking anyone to recognize the sacrifices he quietly made. The final envelope rested at the bottom of the box. Inside was one last handwritten letter. He told me that if I was reading those words, it meant he was gone. He thanked me for every happy memory we had shared and apologized once more for the burden his secret had placed upon my heart. Then he made one final request. He asked me not to let the farmhouse disappear. He hoped I would continue protecting the people who still needed its walls, its warmth, and its promise of safety. He believed the greatest way to honor his memory wasn't by mourning what we had lost, but by continuing the work that had given so many others a chance to live. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my heart. At that moment, I made my decision. The farmhouse would never be sold. Instead, I devoted myself to expanding Mason's mission. We partnered with additional charities, increased counseling services, created educational programs for children, and opened more emergency housing so even more families could find refuge during the darkest moments of their lives. Today, every laugh echoing through those hallways reminds me that true heroes rarely stand in the spotlight. They work quietly, expecting no applause, changing lives one act of compassion at a time. Mason Brooks never sought recognition for what he built, yet his kindness continues to ripple through generations of families who now have a future because one man refused to ignore another person's pain. His greatest legacy was never the farmhouse itself, but the countless lives forever transformed within its walls.